The big story for today that we're watching out for is the clean chit that has been given to Madhabi Buch by the Lokpal. But first, let's quickly understand what's happened. 3 complaints were filed against Ms. Madhabi Buch, and this was primarily based on allegations from the second Hindenburg report dated the 10th of August 2024. And these complaints alleged corruption, conflict of interest, and quid pro quo dealings connected to her role at SEBI and certain regulated entities, including the Adani Group. Now, all of these have been refuted. What the Lokpal of India says is, further, there is no case for investigation from here on. No undue gain has been seen or corruption proven against ex-SEBI chairman. In fact, the past investments and consultancy incomes were adequately disclosed, legitimate, and outside the scope of corruption statutes. And the report of Hindenburg, a known short seller, was not deemed reliable or sufficient to base corruption case. After that, if you see in terms of where Lokpal of India's final ruling goes, all 3 complaints were dismissed is what they've indicated. The allegations were termed frivolous and politically motivated attempts to sensationalize regulatory matters from here on, and the complainants indirectly reprimanded. Moving from there on, if you see in terms of the complete clean chit, if you have to talk about that, what they've said is no bias or favoritism was found. Apart from that, the Lokpal's order affirms that the allegations of regulatory favoritism involving the Adani Group were completely baseless. Now, if you have to look at the regulatory part of it as well. Now, Hindenburg has been dismissed. They've said it is not credible as a legal evidence from here on. Overall, if you see in terms of the market manipulation, they've clearly said there has been no market manipulation. The record is clean and upheld by the top authorities as well. Overall, if you see in terms of the due process that was highlighted, media and political narratives that did come in, they have been debunked as well, and this is what the Lokpal has come out and said. Overall, the corporate governance also has been upheld, and they've said that SEBI's ethical standards have been affirmed, and this is by reiterating that SEBI's institutional integrity and rejecting conflict of interest charges. The order sends a strong signal that India's capital markets are robustly governed. Moving on, now let's understand in terms of the opposition allegations against Madhabi Buch and alleged links to Adani Group have been fully debunked. And this is basically what Mahua Moitra had actually come out and lodged a complaint with Lokpal against SEBI chief, alleging quid pro quo arrangements which potentially threatens national interest, and this was done back then in September 2024. In fact, she had also earlier demanded that SEBI chairperson should be suspended. All of the above have been refuted by the Lokpal, and this is what is the big story. In fact, let's quickly understand what is in the purview of the Lokpal as well. It is the anti-corruption watchdog for public servants. It is empowered to investigate complaints against ministers, MPs, and bureaucrats. So that's what is their purview. Apart from that, if you see how it operates, it does operate independently to uphold integrity in governance and public institutions. And the current chair is Shri Justice Ajay Manikrao Khanvilkar. He's the current chair as well of the Lokpal. So clearly, a big relief for former SEBI chair Madhabi Buch, where she has been given a clean chit by the Lokpal as well. In fact, let's also look at what TMC MP Mahua Moitra's allegation said, that Madhabi Buch as SEBI chairperson had favored Adani Group, and that has been demolished. That's the allegation that has been demolished. And clearly, it has failed to recuse herself also, and that has been allegation of Buch failing to rescue herself, I beg your pardon, has also been shattered. So that's the news coming in there. Now let's also welcome in our guest, Shriram Subramanian, MD and founder at InGovern, to tell us more. In fact, Shriram, good afternoon and welcome to the show, and a pleasure to speak to you. My first question coming to you is your first initial comments, because this is something that you have spoken about earlier as well. clearly defending former SEBI chair?
Yeah, I think the allegations did not have substance in the first place. The Hindenburg report pointed out each one of the categories. One is it has to be understood that Madhabi Buch and her husband both are professionals. The Hindenburg report had specific dates also of investments done by Madhabi Buch in some entities in Mauritius, etc., when she lived in Singapore. So all those, in fact, Madhabi Buch and her husband put out a detailed point-to-point rebuttal to each of the allegations by Hindenburg. So there didn't seem to be any substance because the investments done by Madhabi Buch at that time was about 10 years old, or in 2017-18, when she would not have even known that she was in contention for a role at SEBI, and let alone a role as subsequently chairperson at SEBI. It is, and Madhabi Buch, and even the Hindenburg report says that the investment was wound down in 2018 or immediately after Madhabi Buch joined SEBI. So from that perspective, the amounts also were fairly insignificant. The Hindenburg report points out that the investment was about $500,000 or about 4 crores. So all those amounts were frivolous, or for a person of a stature or experience of Madhabi Buch and her husband who are professionals, I would think the amounts invested were inconsequential. The timing was completely off because they had invested as professionals in their professional careers much before she joined SEBI. And so those were the cases. On the other hand, allegations that her husband favored REITs, Brookfield, because he was an advisor here. The REIT changes in REIT regulations that came out was a demand by everyone in the marketplace. I mean, including other market participants, including bankers, including all investors, etc. So there is no specific allegation or specific this one that points out to the fact that this one happened, changes happened due to the nature and favored one particular market participant. And more importantly, the Hindenburg report never even talked about any undue gains for Madhabi Buch or her husband. So there was no gain attributed at all by Madhabi Buch. There were just assumptions and linkages made to Adani Group where absolutely there was no direct specifics. No specifics was mentioned in the Hindenburg, or no gains were attributed at all, even by them. So from that perspective, it was fairly obvious that the Hindenburg report was at best a witch hunt or an allegation against the SEBI chairperson at that time.
Mr. Subramanian, good afternoon. Thanks so much for joining in. It's Puneet this side. And you made some very important and fair points. I just wanted to ask you on this, that now that this clarification and this big relief has now come in, does that essentially does this mean that this is the end of it? That now that everything is out in the open, do you see that this is the final nail in the head?
Yeah, I mean, as far as allegations against Madhabi Buch goes, definitely yes. Could SEBI again tighten some more norms? Probably yes. In fact, SEBI has floated a discussion paper, and the new chairperson has talked about some changes which will come up for whole-time members as well as the chairperson to disclose their holdings ahead, probably in the public domain, their assets in the public domain. If they do that, then obviously that process will be much more robust and prevent any allegations in future by anybody for senior executive at SEBI. In fact, another point which I had made is that even other regulators, be it RBI, be it IRDA, etc., don't have these statutes where assets of these people who are appointed or at senior levels are disclosed at all. So from that perspective, I think there should be much more transparency for these regulators, because they can be subject to allegations. I mean, the senior executives can be subject to allegations in future too, because they may be favoring any regulations may be favoring any specific business group, or they could be seen as so changes in regulations could be seen as favoring any business group.
Shriram, another aspect I want to ask you is, in terms of the order that actually indirectly acknowledges that the Adani Group was being targeted through politically motivated complaints against a regulator, does this mean that, you know, in terms of corporate India, they do become a collateral damage in a scenario like this? And I mean, and then to maneuver over this from an investor perspective becomes really difficult. How do you deal with that?
No, definitely the business group in question here, the Adani Group, was in the political storm right from the first Hindenburg report of January 2023. So from that perspective, it took almost 1.5 to 2 years. They continued, the opposition parties and everybody piled on to the Hindenburg report, and then tried to sort of even include the SEBI chairperson in those allegations. But it was examined by the Supreme Court Special Committee. It was so there were other factors which were there. Investors like GQG sort of put out their support in favor of the Adani Group by buying shares, etc. So investors obviously know that this is a one-off case, that there is always going to be political issues around any, I would say, large business group or this one. This is a global thing, not just necessarily in India. Investors are more worried about other structural factors in India or company-specific matters than this. Is the integrity of the Indian markets compromised? Definitely not. Does the allegations on Madhabi Buch as the SEBI chairperson so compelling that investors will lose faith? No. The amounts talked about are fairly insignificant for a person of the stature. If anything, the corruption or anything of that sort, a person of that position or role could actually, if there is intent, ill intent, malintent, it could be in multiples of hundreds of crores,
Right.
not just a few lakhs or crores.
Right. And Shriram, my last question coming to you, by reiterating SEBI's institutional integrity and rejecting the conflict of interest charges, do you think this actually sends out a really strong signal that the Indian capital markets are robustly governed? Does this show strength?
Yes, but at the end of the day, this is also just a test case, you can say. I mean, there will be moments even in future where the robustness of the institutional mechanisms will be tested time and again, be it in fraud cases, be it conflicts of interest, be it individual integrity, etc., etc. So it's not that everything will be hunky-dory in future, right? I mean, there will be moments where all these elements will be tested for sure.
Right. And my last question, Shriram, coming to you, is the opposition allegations that were made against Buch. And you know, we spoke about the linkage already. What happens to such cases? Because it was TMC MP Mahua Moitra's allegation that, you know, Buch had favored Adani Group, and that has been completely demolished, right? And Moitra's allegation of Buch has, you know, failing to recuse herself has also been shattered. Any comments on that front?
No, I think the opposition parties obviously have a forum to air their allegations, and it is for then the regulatory authorities, whoever the government appoints or whoever is doing the investigations, to come out with whether the allegations are true or false, and that is what has happened in this case. So I think political, obviously everybody reads into what is the essence of the allegations, how deep or this one it is, not just Mahua Moitra's, subsequently Congress government under Pawan Khera's press conferences, etc., also aired out a few things. So it's, I think, I mean, come to think of it, it's not just SEBI, but any other cases also. People read into, investors will read into what is fluff and what is actual substance.
Absolutely, very rightly put out, Shriram. Thank you so much for joining us on the show at NDTV Profit and putting out your views as well.